This is Oball. I'm gonna go over some Guardian builds, and this is more for fractals and dungeons, just PvE in general. And best thing to run in Dungeons and Fractals is Zerker power builds. So you want all Zerker armor, Zerker trinkets, Zerker weapons. And for runes, you want runes of the Scholar. They're pretty much the best runes for most classes, most builds, most cases. And someone did calculations if you can keep your Scholar buff for, I believe it's around 23% of the time, they'll out DPS someone with using all ruby orbs. You're going to be able to keep that up that much, plus much more probably, without much of a problem. As far as sigils go, you want multiple weapon sets. You want a set for force. You want a set for night. And if you're doing daytime dungeons a lot, like a raw, I do a raw a lot, so I have a undead slaying sigil. You can have whatever slaying sigil you want for whatever dungeon you run during the daytime. And another one I have is energy. I do a lot of duoing, soloing, crazy stuff. It's good to have if you do things like that. Or just Lupicus if you're going to melee them just starting out. Your group takes a long time to kill them. Not bad to have an energy. Same thing applies for one-handed weapons. You want to combine night and force. Or accuracy and force if you're doing daytime dungeons. Or you can do a slaying sigil instead of that. Do a raw lot again, and I use an undead slaying sigil in that case plus force. And an energy as well, for the reasons I already went over. And you'll want a main hand weapon and an offhand weapon that have stacking sigils, and pretty much the general best thing to have is perception. You're running hammer or you're doing sword, great sword rotations, you're going to want to stack perception. And the reason to have an offhand and a main hand stacking sigil is because every kill you get 2 stacks instead of 1. I also have a bloodlust one. If you're just going to be camping sword for the most part with right-handed strength trait, bloodlust is for you. It's not a bad option at all. You'll be doing a lot of damage still. And I also have a scepter, which is, I don't really use much, so I only have one. You can go crazy and get an accuracy and a slaying, but I don't find it worthwhile. I don't use it much, so I just have night. And the staff, I have soldier. You can see it's not Zerk because I don't use it to fight at all. I use it for running past trash and kiting mobs around for things like the Wraith Lord event at a Raw 3, and I use it to pull mobs for fractals to the line of sight spot, and I throw a line of warding down at the line of sight spot to keep them occupied, CC'd, so the group can get a jump down on it and immediately swap and fight with something else. So I never use the fight. As far as sigil goes, I use blood for the purposes that I just said, but you can put a stacking sigil on. It's not a bad idea. In case you screw up and swap to it in combat or something like that, you'll at least get a stack out of it. It's really up to you what you pick. Nothing's really spectacular. And I use hammer as well. I'll go over different builds, but the rest of the weapons aren't really worthwhile. Mace is nothing compared to hammer. It's not worth using. Hammer's much better if you want something with support. And shield and torch aren't worth using either compared to focus. Focus is much better. It's got the blocks, it's got the blinds. I just have a torch because I'm lazy and it's just used for stacking. Ideally, I would have gotten a focus like I did with my bloodlust. I'll probably eventually change it. Fractal Focus looks pretty, Fractal Torch looks pretty sweet, and I have 5 of them unfortunately, so I just went with that. And if you're just starting out, or you're struggling, I wouldn't run a bad build and put points towards Valor, get AH and do all that stuff. All those traits are pretty selfish and they don't help the group. They don't benefit you at all, really. I would just run a good power build instead to get used to it and learn it. And you want to spend points into things like damage multipliers and good support traits for your group instead of selfish traits anyway. In that case, where you're just starting out or you're struggling, I would just go with Knight's Gear instead of Zerker Gear. It's kind of like training wheels. You'll be able to take more hits and get more used to the content. And once you get better, you can move up to Zerk. I would still go with Zerker trinkets and Zerker weapons, but just having set a Knight's Gear would be the best option for you instead of running a different build. I would just go with this build, or these builds, and run Knight's Gear. I use barrel orbs for my rune set, just for more power and more vitality since your health's going to be really low. You could run ruby orbs if you want. Those two are probably the best things. Scholars, probably not going to keep the buff. If you're just starting out, you're going to get hit a bit, so it's not worthwhile. And soldier gear, don't use soldier gear. Use knight. Knights is the way to go. It's not bad to have a set of Knight's Gear too, because you can do certain strategies and fractals with the Knight's Gear. And the first build I'm going to go over is the sword focused great sword build. This is the best build to use for dungeons and just overall PvE content. And the core of the build is 10, 25, 0, 0, 25. The reason for this is it hits all the damage multipliers of 10% versus burning foes, 10% versus foes that have a condition. These two will be met pretty much for the most part for most fights if you're in a group doing dungeons. And you'll have Power of the Virtuous, which does 1% more damage for each boon you'll have. You'll have Vigor all the time if you use this trait. And you're in an organized group, you'll have the Might and Fear all the time. And if you're running past trash, you'll have probably Swiftness left over. You might have Regen or Retail or whatever other boons you'll have. You'll probably keep around 4 or 5 boons on average. You have your support traits of Master of Consecrations. This trait pretty much makes a Guardian PvE. It's pretty much a staple of all builds. PvE if you do dungeons. Wall Refraction is the strongest skill that you probably have, along with Purging Flames if you need condition removal. Hollow Ground's pretty nice for some things as well, so you want those traded. And you have Absolute Resolution for more condition removal. Those 3 conditions is pretty nice to have. If you're doing some content where it's done, conditions aren't really a problem. If you have a Mesmer or someone cleansing conditions just fine, you don't really need any more removal, then Unscathed Enkender is probably a good thing to change it to. And you'll have Blind Exposure. Some people use Signet Mastery. I don't think it's worthwhile, because Shelter is the best heal for a DPS Guardian. It's better to block, to keep the block in the rotation along with your blinds and your Aegis, Shield of Wrath, whatever else. Instead of just trying to out heal things, you have another block. I find it a lot better. So this trait's really strong since you have Virtue of Justice, which renews your virtue every time you kill a foe. So you'll be blinding things a lot with that, spamming it at trash mobs. You have Leap of Faith. Yeah, Flashing Blades and Ray of Judgment, they all do blinds. You do a rotation, just keep things blinded. It's 3 stacks every blind for 11 seconds. It's really strong. and you have flashing powerful blades, which does 5% more damage with the sword, and it's getting buffed to 10% in December, which makes this even better of a build to use. Sword DPS is really strong in a Guardian. And you see you have 10 points left over, and you could really just put in whatever you want. Some options are symbolic exposure. I'd only put this in there for fractals, since the sword cleave kind of sucks for some content, and you might even want to keep using greatsword or hammer for some of the fights, and just putting Vuln down is nice. Killing things that do a lot of damage to you faster is good, but I wouldn't do it for dungeons in general. And what I do is I just put my last points in the right hand to strength, 15% more chance to crit while using the sword, and vigorous precision. You get permanent vigor pretty much by using that trait, and that's really strong because you can see you have so little health. If you do raw or high level fractals or harder content, you're going to be getting 1-2 shotted a lot. You want all the dodges you can get. Another good thing you can do is put your points towards 10 in honor for shout recharge reduction. It's pretty nice for fractals for using Aegis of Retreat for boss fights, but it's really not worthwhile, I don't think, for anything else. If you do it in organized groups, things just die. By the time your shout recharges, the battle is already over. I just don't find it worthwhile anymore. If you're pugging and have pretty low DPS or the fights are long, it's pretty good to have for that case. So this is pretty much the best overall build I find for the sword focus greatsword build 10-30-0-5-25. I talked about rotations before. The optimal rotation found to be is you do Whirling Wrath, Symbol of Wrath, Leap of Faith, Binding Blades. You just auto attack until you have Whirling Wrath again up. You do Whirling Wrath again, and then you immediately swap the sword because sword auto is better than greatsword auto. You do Ray of Judgment as well, and then you wait about a second, and then change, and Whirling Wrath again, Symbol of Wrath, Leap of Faith, auto attack until Binding Blaze comes up, use it again, and Whirling Wrath again, and then sword auto again, Ray of Judgment, same stuff. I don't find the rotation to be all that practical for the most part. You're gonna be killing the mobs before you even can swap the sword, and you're not gonna be doing all the blinds and vulnerability you can to keep yourself and your group alive and kill things faster. I usually just do it against bosses since you can't blind them, and you might as well do the best DPS you can against them. But for normal groups, I just start in greatsword, and I start off by doing Whirling Wrath combined with Virtue of Justice, Symbol of Wrath, Leap of Faith for another blind, Ray of Judgment, and then I wait for the blind to run out, use Flashing Blades, and I work in Shield of Wrath if I don't need it to keep myself alive for more damage. So another thing with Whirling Wrath is that if you stand inside a target's hitbox, you can hit it for more than 9 times. And the other build I'm going to go over is the hammer build. And the hammer build is the best thing to run for high level fractals. It's also the best thing to run if you're just starting out or you're pugging. It's good to have because it does permanent protection, and so you want 15 points, and this is the core of the build: 15, 15, 0, 20, 10. And the reason for this is you get everything for your symbols. You get symbolic exposure, you get Vuln for your symbols, you get longer symbols, So you get the damage multiplier versus burning foes, synergy with your renewed justice. Things are pretty much always going to be burning unless they cleanse themselves. So that should always be up, and you have even more vuln stacking from spamming your Virtue of Justice. And again, you want to use Shelter because that's the better the heal, because it's a block. It's better just to use the block to heal than to try to out heal damage by trading signets. It's not worth it. And the backbone of the build again is the 20 in honor for the longer symbols. So you can always get Vuln, always get Permaprot, always be damaging things with your symbols. And a good minor trait to have is the shout reduction time, and of course again 10 in virtues for master consecrations. And you see you have 10 points again left over. Depending on what you're doing, if you're doing general dungeons, I would definitely put 10 more in virtues to get absolute resolution. And if you're doing fractals, which is what this build is best for, other than starting out or pugging, you'll probably want to put your last 10 in radiance to get another 10% damage increase. Things are pretty much always going to have a condition, so you always hit that. And for the master trait, what will you run? There's really nothing spectacular here. For bosses and fractals and stuff, you'll want an extra block. So a good thing to do is have a swap of sword focus. So powerful blaze isn't a bad idea for that, if you do that. And if not, then probably best choice is Radiant Fire. Yeah, it's a torch skill recharge, but it's not the reason why I use it. It uses it for the burning duration. There's really nothing strong here since you're going to be using a hammer for the most part, but I would probably go with that. Unless you use your sword swap a lot for some reason. Another choice is 10 points in the Valor. If you're just starting out or you're doing fractals or something, strength in numbers is a pretty good trait to have. It's really the only worthwhile thing in Valor. It's not bad. It's up to you what you put it towards. This is the most damaging of the 3 that I suggested, which is what I usually do for fractals. And I only really run this for fractals too. I'll go over the heal, utilities, and elite now. And for heal, the best heal is Shelter. You really have a low health pool as a guardian, so the Signet's pretty good. It's got a huge heal. It has a long recharge though, and the block duration of 2 seconds is just too appealing to not use it. It's a lot better to work that in your rotation of blinds and blocks from retreat and your virtue and your shield of wrath into it, rather than try to out heal damage. And as far as utilities go, retreat's pretty much always on my bar for another Aegis. It's a great skill to have. It's pretty much a staple. As well as Water Reflection if there's any sort of projectile threat, or you can benefit from reflecting them and doing more damage. If there's a lot of projectiles around, you want to use both Wall Reflection and Shield of the Avenger, especially for things like fractals and raw. And if you want to do that, even if there's a little bit of a threat, if you're the only person with projectile defenses, or if you're pugging and you think maybe nobody else will use them. And for other utilities, you got Purging Flames is what you should be running if conditions are a problem at all. Hollow Ground is a good choice too if knockdowns are really a big problem, like in the Snowblind Fractal event, or if you want to melee the rampaging the ice elemental and the dredge fractal. Or if you have an Ellie in the group, it's good for that too, because they can just keep making might stacks with their lightning hammer blast. And stand your ground if knockbacks aren't too big of an issue, but they're still an issue. And if you have a free slot in your bar, you can use Bane Signet, or if you have Power of the Virtuous Straits where you get damage multiplier for each boon you have, Save Yourselves is another good option. And again, if you're the only person with reflex and some projectiles are really an issue, you might just want to go with Sanctuary as well. Just have all three. It's also good for things, blocking things out like at the Dredge Bombs event in Fractals. Or something like CM Path 2 where you want to put all the barrels down to blow up the door. And there's nothing else that's too big of a help for Dungeons and Fractals as far as utilities go. And for Elite, you want renewed focus for pretty much everything. There's only a few cases where like Tomb of Courage is good if you stack in melee for old Tom. It's good to have there. Or just the Maul if your group doesn't have Agony resistance to survive it at 40. And that's about it. So thanks for watching the guide. Hope you got a lot of good information out of it.